is Megan Schlosser. Bob Cook advises this group, and the team has been working with Amazon Wash.
Thanks everyone for sticking it out. I'm going to try to keep it high energy here to get us home. I'm Megan Schlosser, and we investigated the business cost of corporate conflict with communities impacted by extractive projects, and we did so on behalf of our client, Amazon Watch. Here's a quick look at the Amazon Watch team. We're led by our project manager, Kate Mahoney, and our deputy project manager, Eurisi Simpson. Our faculty advisor is Dr. Bob Cook. Amazon Watch is a nonprofit organization focused on advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples and the protection of environmental resources all around the world. They have a lot of experience seeing firsthand the damages that extractive industries can cause to the environment and to local communities. And with this experience, they began to see a pattern. They saw that companies that were failing to engage the local communities and failing to appropriately assess environmental impact were experiencing unanticipated costs. And these costs came in the form of project delays, litigation, and sometimes even project closure. And these costs were not being appropriately communicated to their investors. So Amazon Watch had this theory. They thought, if we can prove that on a recent number of high-profile projects, financial losses were the direct result of community conflict, we could expose these risks to the companies themselves, their investors, and also to regulatory agencies like the Securities and Exchange Commission. And we believe through our capstone work here, we've proved this to be true. So here's a look at the 21 projects and the associated companies that were originally given to us by Amazon Watch. So you'll see that they cover a wide variety of extractive industries. So we're talking oil and gas pipelines, oil refineries, mining, and agricultural operations. And then to walk you through how we did data collection and eventually modeling, I'm going to use the example of the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is a very high-profile project here in the US. So to orient you on Dakota Access Pipeline, it's owned by Energy Transfer Partners. It was originally announced in 2014 with an estimated cost of $4.9 billion and an expected completion date in 2016. So it's a crude oil pipeline that brings crude oil from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota to Illinois. And the reason it's so highly contentious is because it crosses through historically and culturally significant land for the Upper Sioux tribe on the Standing Rock Reservation. There was a lot of scrutiny for this project and a lot of protests and community conflict. All of these protests, petitions, permit reviews resulted in significant delays for the project. Eventually, the first oil was delivered in the pipeline in May of 2017, but that was after roughly 1 year of delay, and there's a lot of litigation that remains unresolved. So bringing it back to our project, right, we were tasked with identifying the cost of community conflict. So where we started was with some University of California, Berkeley undergraduate student case studies that were given to us by our client, Amazon Watch. And then we turned to publicly available documentation. So we're thinking about Securities and Exchange Commission 10-Ks, government filings, financial statements, academic papers, media resources, all of these resources. For Dakota Access Pipeline, we were able to find a cost of $2.6 billion identified for delay, and we got that cost from a University of Colorado study. We then built 3 tools for our project: the project valuation tool, the statistical tool, and our market and financial data repository. Diving into the project valuation tool, so with our 21 case studies, we were able to identify 36 data points of cost from that publicly available documentation. But what we really wanted to investigate was, is this cost material to the company's value, or what's often referred to as the enterprise value? So what we did was we took a peer-reviewed, published method for translating sustainable development initiatives, so we're thinking like good corporate behavior, into impacts on company valuation. And what we did was we flipped this approach on its head. We inverted it because what we wanted to see was, how does bad corporate behavior that results in community conflict impact the company's valuation? So again, using the example of Dakota Access Pipeline, we start with that $2.6 billion cost that we found in that University of Colorado paper, and we took the present value in perpetuity of that cost, and we ended up with a figure that we termed the enterprise cost of $17.9 billion. And so you might be like, I just took a really big number and I made it even bigger. What does that mean? What is the context here? So what it means is that if Energy Transfer Partners continues to engage in this type of behavior that results in community conflict, they can experience a 21% decrease on their company's valuation. So we're really proving this is material to the company. And then looking at some other projects that we analyzed, so for Chevron, we saw a $118 billion hit on their enterprise value associated with lost productivity for the Chevron oil facility in Richmond, California. For Newmont, the Conga mine in Peru, we saw a $40 billion hit on enterprise value associated with lost capital expenses. And then lastly, Equitrans, we saw on the Mountain Valley Pipeline an enterprise value hit of $17.4 billion associated with lost productivity. So we took all of our project valuation results and we put it into a regression with some common factors that we had identified between the projects to see if we could determine any kind of pattern. And we saw, for project activity, we saw the highest costs were associated with oil and gas pipelines. We also saw that insufficient environmental and human impact assessment were very common in the majority of the projects that we looked at. So this really suggests a theme, right, that extractive industries are just continuously failing to plan for their environmental and human impacts. And then lastly, we did see, kind of as expected, that existing reputational risk was linked with higher hits on enterprise value. And then another theory we wanted to test was whether controversy data is material to stock price performance. So we looked at several controversy metrics. So we're thinking ESG scores, health and safety scores, governance scores, and we looked at that in relation to historical returns on share price. And we did see a statistically significant relationship between the two. So to us, this proves that controversy data is material to stock price performance. Lastly, we built a financial data repository. It's really just a database full of financial metrics of the companies that we looked at, and it's really meant to help Amazon Watch in the future if they wish to continue this project. So overall, we did validate Amazon Watch's hypothesis. So we did see that companies that were failing to engage the local communities and failing to appropriately assess environmental impact were experiencing a material hit on their enterprise value. And the way that we did that was by looking at 16 projects and identifying 36 enterprise costs, and enough of those enterprise costs were material to the company's overall valuation. We also proved this to be true with our statistical tool where we linked controversy data with stock price performance. Obviously, our conclusions come with some caveats. So we had a very small sample size. We only had 16 projects and 36 data points of cost that we were able to put through our project valuation tool. And then we also had a really significant negative bias. So we looked at some of the most notoriously bad actors in the industry. To really prove our theory correct, we would have to look at companies that were appropriately performing stakeholder engagement to really see if our results stand. And then lastly, we interviewed 2 Columbia professors, Bruce Kahn and Brad Schwartz, who were incredibly helpful. And they pointed out that our costs are in perpetuity and that a better, potentially more accurate approach would be to look at point-in-time costs. So what's next for us? We're going to present our findings to Amazon Watch and the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is really exciting. We also hope to pass our work on to another academic group to investigate those good corporate actors, so companies that are performing stakeholder engagement, and also take a look at point-in-time costs. But what we really hope that our project does is that it puts a dollar value behind community conflict and that it motivates these companies to take stakeholder engagement seriously. Some extractive industries like oil and gas pipelines and oil refineries might diminish as part of the clean energy transition, but there's other extractive industries like mining that are here to stay. So that's why it's so critical to us to encourage these companies to have good corporate behavior, environmental stewardship, and stakeholder engagement. And we believe that the best way to do that is by showing them the dollar consequences of not doing so. Thank you. I'll take it.
Behind you. Behind you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I'm most familiar with the Anglo Gold in Ashanti. In fact, it was very close to a Millennium Villages project of the Earth Institute, actually. And it wasn't so much conflict as it was harm to the children who were mining for the filings once the project had sort of distorted, and a completely distorted market. So the educators would leave school because they'd earn more money by panning for the gold that was left by Anglo Gold. So I'm just wondering about this notion of community conflict, because you went through, all the different environmental and social impacts of it, and obviously the Dakota Access Pipeline is a great example of the conflict. But how do you measure these other impacts in ways that will resonate for the company? Thank you.
Yes, that's a great question. So the way that we interpreted community conflict was kind of a catch-all term. So we had that list of 21 case studies, and each of those projects was different. I mean, community conflict was a common theme throughout most of them, but the way that we did cost, or the way that we found costs rather for each of those projects was a little bit different. So you saw like a lot of those were lost productivity costs. So that was from like delay, which could be a form of from community conflict, but also there's other reasons for delay, like litigation, which maybe isn't really the community. So I will say we kind of did a custom approach for each of those projects, and we kind of used community conflict as a catch-all term to describe when a company is not appropriately, being a good corporate behavior in the market.
Could you talk a little bit more about how using the point-in-time valuation would change your overall enterprise results?
Yes. So, and bear with me, I do not have a financial background, but I have learned a lot on this project. So my understanding, right, is the way that enterprise value works is it looks at the company's revenue in perpetuity. So the way that we did, where we ran our numbers, was we looked at what if that cost happens in perpetuity. And so when we were interviewing Bruce Kahn and Brad Schwartz, they were thinking that if we looked at the costs as point in time, so like when they actually occurred for that project, rather than just putting them out into perpetuity, we would get smaller and probably more accurate results.
So the 2.6 you did every year, like
forever. Yeah.
And that's how you got to 17 billion.
Correct.
One more question on the enterprise value. What was the discount rate used in the perpetuity model?
I'm so happy you asked, because I have an appendix slide. And so it shows you the actual formula that we used. So that cell in green it says present value of losses, but that's what we termed the enterprise cost. So it's the cost multiplied by 1 plus the 5-year revenue growth rate, which was custom for all of our projects, divided by the weighted average cost of capital minus the 5-year revenue growth rate.
Also, a quick question. On the enterprise risk on determining the amount of money lost or the valuation of lost labor or revenue gain, did that also take into account any legal aspect after the fact? If you're talking about Superfund sites also, did that also take into account with some of the bigger projects that have had legal issues 20 years later rather than in the front end of the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way we did our modeling was we assumed that cost was the same in perpetuity. And so what you're referring to is there wouldn't be cost for a certain number of times, and then it gets listed as a Superfund site, and then there's a ton of costs. So that would be like a custom, method of analyzing that cost. We didn't do that, but that is a great suggestion.
So this just goes to show you, you've seen a breadth of projects, and I think it shows what these capstone projects really are for students and in these programs. So congratulations to everyone. These are phenomenal projects, and you've done an outstanding job. I do want to take some time to thank all of the faculty advisors that work closely with these students throughout the semester. A big round of applause. And that really does conclude our capstone final briefings for the spring 2023 semester. We do have the room until 9, so help yourselves to refreshments in the back. And thank you all that are joining us online. Have a good night.